For centuries, it was archaeology's most frustrating paperweight. Found across Europe from Roman graves to military camps, these 12-sided hollow bronze objects, the Roman dodecahedron, had no labels, no instruction manuals, and seemingly no purpose. Some called them candle holders, others knitting tools or astronomical instruments. But after 200 years of guessing, scientists think they finally have the answer. Today we are diving into the breakthrough that cracked the dodecahedron code and 4 other historical mysteries that were finally solved by modern science. The 12-sided mystery solved. The Roman dodecahedron is an artifact of great intrigue and mystery. The first thing to know is that there are a lot of them. At least 120 of these artifacts have been discovered over the last roughly, let's say, 300 years. Normally, if archaeologists have over 100 examples of the same artifact, they can figure it out pretty quickly. But not this time. Every single one of the 120 examples has been discovered in the northwestern provinces of the Roman Empire. All of them date to between the late 2nd century and the late 4th century. They all come from the same roughly 200-year period, and they all come from within the borders of the empire. These are going to be important clues, so keep them in mind, and they're all the same. They might be a tad bit different in measurements, but they all look identical. Each dodecahedron consists of 12 pentagons forming the faces. It has a hollow interior, and the pentagons meet at 20 corners. It is essentially a pentagonal dodecahedron with each of the 20 corners topped by a small sphere. Each pentagonal face has a hole in it. These holes vary in size. They all look the same, but they are all slightly different, probably because they weren't mass-produced. Some are only about 1.6 inches tall, with others as big as 3.9 inches tall. It's also worth noting that they do vary drastically in weight. The lightest one ever found only weighs 1 ounce, while some of the bigger ones weigh up to 20 ounces. These might be boring specifics, but they are important to know. Most experts figure they were designed to be identical, but because they were likely made by different people, each one was a little different. There also isn't any writing on any of them, not so much as a Maximus was here. The very first Roman dodecahedron ever discovered was in 1739. It was found in the English Midlands, and nobody knew what it was. Since then, dodecahedrons have been discovered in Belgium, Hungary, Luxembourg, France, Germany, and Switzerland. Weirdly enough, though, not a single one has ever been found in Italy, the heart of the empire. That must be significant. But what could it mean? The answer comes from classical archaeologist Michael Guggenberger. Guggenberger performed a study in 2000 comparing all of the different dodecahedrons and compiling their different measurements. He also looked at where each one was found and came up with a realistic explanation for why. He declared the dodecahedrons products of the Gallo-Romans, not the Romans themselves. He believed the dodecahedrons were built by Celtic tribes within the Roman Empire, which explains why they've all been found in the Northwest. But what's weird is that you can't find any historical records anywhere, even briefly mentioning the dodecahedrons. They don't appear in any ancient art, either Celtic or Roman. There is not one example of a dodecahedron anywhere in an old book, poem, or a mural. This absence of evidence has left archaeologists in the dark scrambling for answers. They were hoping to find answers in the places where the artifacts were found, but that doesn't seem to be helping either. Dodecahedrons have been found just about everywhere with nothing to connect them. They've been discovered in the graves of men and also women. They've been found in coin hoards and garbage pits. Where they're found doesn't help at all. Plus, there's no explanation for their use. What do you use a 12-sided cube for? One that has holes in each face and balls where the corners are. Here are some of the answers researchers have come up with over the years. Dodecahedrons were used as weapons, decorations, candlestick holders, measurement devices, or children's toys. Some think they were used as dice for some game or possibly spools for knitting. I could go on and on with more than 50 theories, though Guggenberger claimed he dismissed most of them as highly improbable. I think Guggenberger was maybe driven insane by trying to figure out the dodecahedrons. He ended up doubling down on a really bizarre explanation, in which he claimed the artifacts represented the universe itself. In 2013, Guggenberger did another study on the dodecahedrons. This time, he was determined to come up with an answer. He turned to the philosophy of ancient Greek thinkers to make sense of this enigma. Greek philosophers like Plato and Pythagoras associated 4 different shapes with 4 different elements. Tetrahedrons were associated with fire. Octahedrons represented air. Icosahedrons were linked to water. And finally, hexahedrons were of the earth. Guggenberger suggested there was a 5th shape, the dodecahedron. He claimed that in the 2nd century AD, the philosopher Plutarch added a 5th shape designed as an all-encompassing symbol to represent the cosmos. He figured the Celtic people in the Roman Empire learned of this symbolism and embraced it, creating all of these artifacts as little boxed universes. Unbeknownst to Mr. G, he may have held the key during his first study he did in 2000. He just didn't realize it. In that original study, Guggenberger described a dodecahedron found in a woman's grave in Germany in 1966. It was found sitting right next to a mysterious bone artifact shaped like a rod. It's surprising he didn't put the 2 pieces together right there and then. And experts are now saying that the dodecahedron was attached to the end of the rod, creating a scepter. All the other rods had probably been made out of wood, meaning they decayed long before archaeologists started finding them. Wood rots so fast, 2,000 years is more than enough time to erase the evidence. It would explain why only 1 rod was found in 1 grave, and it was made from bone. Given the Celtic background of the object, this makes total sense. It could have been linked to ancient Druidic traditions used as a symbolic scepter in magical ceremonies. The Druids were notorious for these types of rituals, and seeing as they were influenced heavily by the Romans, it makes sense they added a Roman object to their tradition. Guggenberger even admitted this in the end, writing that the dodecahedron likely functioned as an amulet. But instead of being around someone's neck, it was on the end of a staff. So, what do you think? Does this mysterious shape represent the universe? Was it just decoration on a staff? Has the mystery been solved, or is this just a lot of mental gymnastics to make sense of something that can't be made sense of? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. The Phaistos disk. In the beginning of the 20th century on the island of Crete, archaeologists uncovered a disk. Ever since that fateful day, cryptologists, scientists, students, and nerds at home have tried desperately to decipher the weird symbols on the disk. Many have tried, many have failed. But one person might have finally gotten it right. Linguist Dr. Gareth Owens has dedicated more than 3 decades of his life to studying this artifact, known casually as the Phaistos disk. In 2024, he claimed to have deciphered 99% of its content. That was 2 years ago, though the scientific community still isn't convinced. Before I give you a solution, you should probably know the object's history. It was discovered by Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier in 1908. Luigi was excavating the legendary Minoan palace of Phaistos when he came across a clay disc roughly 6 inches in diameter. The disc struck him immediately as an important artifact. On each side of the clay surface is a spiral of text. There are 45 distinct symbols on the disc, but they repeat, so there are a total of 241 characters. Nobody has ever figured out what even one of the distinct symbols mean, but I can tell you how they were made. Each individual sign was stamped onto the soft clay, and then the disc was put into a furnace to fire it. The process was pretty easy and quite standard for ancient Greece. The disc dates to at least 1600 BC, putting it at almost 4,000 years old. The object is so ancient, so weird, and so frustrating that for a long time people thought it was fake. It's usually modern archaeologists who prove that objects are fake, but this time it was the opposite. Modern tests have proven the disc is authentic. Alright, so what the heck was it for? And what do the symbols mean? One of the weirder things about the disc is that the clay used to make it doesn't appear to have come from the island where it was found. That means it may have come from outside Crete, maybe even from beyond the Mediterranean. But as with everything involving this item, nothing is for sure, and everything is open to interpretation. Speaking of interpretation, just take a look at these symbols. One of them looks like a guy with a mohawk. One of them is known as the captive and looks like someone held prisoner. There's a symbol called a child, and there's one called woman. They're pretty bizarre no matter which way you look at them. There are symbols of arrows, clubs, shields, boomerangs, beehives, and ships. You can go on forever. Trees, cats, flutes, you get the point. Each symbol seems to be something from daily life. But do they spell something, or could they just be decorative? Dr. Owens thinks they correspond to words. He believes the symbols spell out a prayer to a mother goddess, specifically the Minoan goddess of love, Ariadne. In Athens, they had Aphrodite, but on the island of Crete, Ariadne was the woman of love. Historians think that she was probably inspired, or at least in some way related to the Eastern goddess Ashtart. Gods and goddesses often transcended borders, took on new names and aspects, but were ultimately the same deity. Owens claimed he figured out the translation by referring to Linear B, the syllabic script used by the Mycenaean Greeks. It has long been considered the oldest known form of Greek, with some of the most primitive symbols used as characters. I will say that to us regular people, Linear B doesn't really look like the symbols on the Phaistos disk, but apparently it helped Owens crack the code. The problem is, it's just a little sketchy because Owens didn't show his work. And when you're a scientist, you kind of have to show your work for people to believe you, otherwise, and anyone could point at anything and say whatever came to their head. For now, let's just assume that Owens did the work, crunched the data, and isn't making anything up. According to his solution, the disk is a religious text to a pregnant goddess. He says it's clear from a comparison he made with other religious works from other inscriptions found in Crete. But again, he hasn't shown us that work. He's saying he compared it to other texts, but he's not showing us what he compared it to. So it's kind of hard to believe him. In science, you should be able to replicate the results. I want to believe that he solved the mystery, but there is a lot of evidence otherwise. Just a month after he claimed to solve the disk, Ancient Origins released an article claiming that his translation was implausible. Yes, and that's just one example of the community rallying against him. So, is the mystery solved? Does the Phaistos disk contain a hymn to the goddess of love? Or is Owens just risking his career to pull a solution out of thin air? Which do you think is the case? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Canada's bizarre subway deer finally solved. Something weird happened in Toronto in 1976. A subway extension in the Canadian city was being excavated when a worker discovered a set of antlers. But these were no ordinary antlers. They looked prehistoric. They were found underneath the city after all. So the worker assumed he had come across the remains of some ancient extinct deer. That's what he thought, but no one could prove it. Experts nicknamed the mysterious species Torontocervus hypogaeus, which means horned Toronto deer from underground. I mean, good name. Over time, people just started calling it the Toronto subway deer. For the next 5 decades, no one could pinpoint the lineage of the species that the antlers belonged to. And it wasn't for lack of trying. Researchers collected DNA from 24 ancient deer-like species known as cervids. This included samples from ancient ancestors of modern moose, caribou, and elk, but none of the tests turned up anything. There was no match to any known species, and scientists hit a bit of a dead end, but not before someone drew an artistic rendition of what the creature may have looked like. Check it out. Image thanks to Cher Owen. It's kind of cute, right? The antlers probably would have remained an eternal mystery if not for a recent advance in DNA analysis technology. Researchers at Trent University determined what extinct species the antlers belonged to with 100% success. Dr. Aaron Schaefer, chair of forensic science at the university, announced that the antlers belonged to an extinct type of deer closely related to mule deer and white-tailed deer. Experts are saying the discovery matches the larger picture of what was happening in Canada 12,000 years ago. The Ice Age was coming to an end. Golete and Turkey was just being built and megafauna were vanishing at an alarming rate. Woolly mammoths, the Irish elk, saber-toothed tigers, and dire wolves to name a few. All of these animals were going extinct as the climate warmed and smaller versions of themselves were out competing them for food. The research team believes this is probably what happened to the Toronto subway deer, and it was likely a gigantic deer that failed to adapt to the rapid change in climate. The fact that it was found so deep beneath the city is a testament to how much our planet is always changing. A fingerprint solves a 2,000-year-old mystery. At Lund University in Sweden, scientists found a fingerprint preserved in tar. The tar had been used 2,000 years ago to seal the oldest known plank-built boat in all of Scandinavia. That one singular fingerprint has reached across time, connecting researchers to the warriors who used the vessel to attack the residents of a remote island. That is a lot to unpack, so let's take it one step at a time. Long ago, in the 4th century BC, a small fleet of boats set out to raid the island of Al. The island is located just off the coast of modern-day Denmark. The raiders were likely in 4 boats and had the express intention of wiping out the inhabitants of Al and stealing their stuff. It was a good plan, but it didn't go over very well for the raiders. They were defeated by the islanders, who were apparently a lot harder to raid than anticipated. The victorious defenders took the raiders' weapons and threw them into a bog along with one of their boats. Experts believe this was done as a ritual, with the islanders offering the objects as a sacrifice to celebrate their victory and praise their gods for their success. Remember, when in doubt, throw something important in a bog. That's my motto. The boat was discovered in the 1880s, preserved within the short bog. Then in the 1920s, the bog was excavated more extensively, and the boat was removed and transported for safekeeping. To this day, it is not only the oldest, but also the only known prehistoric plank boat ever discovered in Scandinavia. It holds a prominent place at the National Museum of Denmark, where it will stay until the end of time, hopefully. That's how proud the Danes are of their ancient boat. After the boat was discovered, an archaeologist slowly put together the pieces of what happened. They were left with a huge neon question mark. Who were the sea raiders that attacked the island? Where did they come from? And what was their motivation? These three questions have tortured Scandinavian archaeologists for the last 100 years. But now they think they figured it out, and it's all thanks to some fragments of the boat that were recently uncovered. When the boat was initially removed from the bog, it underwent chemical preservation. This is a necessary step to make sure the boat remains intact and doesn't just fall apart. These kinds of ancient wooden artifacts survive in bogs because they are acidic, free of oxygen, and typically quite cold. It's the perfect recipe to mummify wood. But once the wood is out of the bog, oxygen starts the decay process immediately. Thus, chemical preservation is a necessity to keep the boat alive. But the chemicals that save the boat also work to destroy any chance of scientists analyzing it. So, double-edged sword. So when researchers found fragments that had never undergone chemical preservation, they threw a block party. They were incredibly excited to analyze the pieces at the lab using modern scientific techniques. The results were incredible. The first thing scientists learned was that the boat had been sealed with pine tar. Head archaeologist Mikkel Fabel said that means it was built somewhere with rich pine forests. It was a discovery that changed the game because previous theories suggested the boat came from Hamburg in Germany, but there were more extensive pine forests in the Baltic Sea region, so the boat probably came from there. The next breakthrough was when the team used X-ray tomography to perform high-resolution scans of the pine tar. That was when they noticed the fingerprint stuck in the sticky black stuff. The team figured it either belonged to someone who worked on the boat or one of the warriors who got on the boat when it set off to raid the island. It isn't a full solution, but it's a partial one. Scientists now know the rough area where the boat came from, but they still don't know who built it or why they were so intent on raiding owls. And researchers did mention that if the boat came from a pine forest on the edge of the Baltic Sea, this raid involved over 100 miles of open sea. That's not a big deal today, but in the pre-Roman Iron Age, it was like sailing to the New World. That means the people in that boat must have wanted to destroy the people of Al on the island very, very badly. Maybe they were a rival group. Was there some sort of falling out between the two tribes? Did somebody steal someone else's wife? I mean, there are a million possible motives, but there's no way of knowing for sure. Not yet, anyway. Scientists are trying to fully close this case. So there might be a part 2 coming soon. Right now, they're trying to extract ancient DNA from the sealing tar, which could be the final piece of the puzzle. Researchers know the rough area where the boat was built, and with a smidgen of DNA, they could identify the tribe. Then we can probably figure out the motivation behind the attacks. So, come on, Mikkel Fabel, get your team working double time. We want answers over here. So that's how they moved the Easter Island heads. This is one I know you've been waiting for. After centuries of speculation over how Easter Island's residents moved the colossal stone statues known as the Moai, the debate has finally ended. Scientists have answers to put this whole thing to bed. Easter Island sits in the middle of the Pacific Ocean at the very edge of Polynesia. It's believed the first settlers arrived 800 years ago, although that's a little up for debate, undoubtedly from one or more of the other islands. Nobody knows what pushed them to sail into this unknown quadrant of the ocean. But they came with their boats regardless. They landed on the island, set up shop, and launched their own civilization. At the center of Rapa Nui's culture were the large stone sculptures that have captivated the world. But now we know they had bodies too. For some inexplicable reason, the statues were buried so that only their heads stick out of the ground. But when you physically dig underneath, there's more. They have whole bodies and originally stood on pedestals. In fact, recent evidence has shown they once wore bright red hats that kind of look like stone sombreros. Kind of unrelated, but also directly related. In 2018, it was revealed how those hats got onto the Moai's heads. So, a few numbers to throw at you here. The Easter Islanders constructed 887 Moai that scientists currently know of. Each one weighs over 80 tons, and each one was decorated with a 13-ton hat, known as a pukao, made from an entirely different type of stone. I'm not sure if that has any significance, but it feels important. Why two different types of stones, do you think? Symbolic. Economic. Anyway, I can tell you how the hats got onto the heads. After the statues were erected, the hats were likely rolled 11 miles across the island to the construction site, where they were then rolled up a ramp leading to the top of the Moai. This little mystery was solved by Sean W. Hickson, a graduate student at Penn State. I even have a diagram to show you. Check it out. You can see the ramp leading to the Moai's head and the pukao with the round hat being gently rolled to the top. Each of the pukao also has an indent where it fits perfectly onto the top of the statue. So, that's enough about the hats. Let's get back to the meat and potatoes. We call the statues Moai, but the full name is Moai Aringa Ora in the tongue of the Rapa Nui. It means the living faces of our ancestors. And that is a massive clue. Most experts are confident that the Moai were erected to pay homage to the deceased ancestors of the people who lived on the island. Maybe some of them were built to honor dead kings and to immortalize their spirit, but most of them were probably reflections of past ancestors. This would make the most sense because ancestor worship is still a big deal in countless cultures across the globe. Everyone's told to respect their elders. The first time a European saw one of these statues was 1722. Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen landed on the island and wrote about these huge heads. Then in 1770, here's the travel writer Felipe González Aedo sketched the statues for the first time. Of course, it wouldn't be until centuries later that scientists sat down to study them in earnest. Throughout all the studies, all the investigations, all the analyses, the one thing that no one has ever been able to figure out is how the islanders with their primitive technology moved the statues. Now, researchers from 2 universities have cracked the case. Binghamton University and the University of Arizona teamed up and used a mixture of physics, 3D modeling, and good old-fashioned ingenuity to move the statues. I mean, they really moved them. They didn't just solve the mystery on paper, they did it themselves in real life to prove that it works. No aliens, no magic, no prehistoric levitation technology, nothing but ropes and rhythm. As oral tradition on Easter Island claims the statues walked from the quarry where they were carved to the places where they stood, sometimes as far as 10 miles away. This has always been a sore spot for researchers who never believed the statues actually walked. After all, how could they? Carl Lipo and Terry Hunt studied nearly 100 Moai to find similarities in the design. And it turns out they were custom made for a very specific purpose. Each statue has a wide D-shaped base and a slight forward lean. This forward lean made them able to wobble in a side-to-side motion. By attaching ropes to the top of the statue and having a cleared runway on the ground, the Rapa Nui literally walked the statues across the island using physics. They wobbled each statue like a penguin and walked it into place. Then they used a ramp to put the hat on. To test the theory, Carl and Terry built a replica Moai to the same specifications as the ones on Easter Island, only it weighed 4.35 tons instead of 80 tons. With just 18 people and some ropes, they were able to walk the statue almost 350 feet in 40 minutes. And just like that, the problem was solved. The Moai statues really did walk themselves into place just like the Rapa Nui have been trying to tell us. Carl and Terry said that it doesn't matter how big the statues were, 80 tons, 100 tons, the physics works every time. There's one more piece of the puzzle that solved as well. For years, scientists have assumed that the network of rough roads all over the island were used as ceremonial pathways. And that might be true, but it's also clear they were built to guide the walking giants to where they stood on their platforms. If you ask me, that is case closed. I don't think anyone else can solve the mystery of the Moai better than Carl and Terry. So, what do you think? Could this method have been used on other massive stones around the world? If a group of remote Polynesian islanders were able to devise a strategy to transport 80-ton statues across uneven terrain, what about Stonehenge? If the Easter Islanders could do it, why not the Egyptians? Maybe they wobbled the pyramid stones across the desert. What if every ancient megalith was built using a similar method? Maybe they had no secret knowledge of advanced building techniques. They all could have just realized that wobbling large blocks across large distances was easier than dragging them. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. And be sure to subscribe and let me know what other ancient mysteries you'd like to hear about next. See you soon. Bye.